Okay, now let's get into some of the fun stuff. Let's talk about lists. I've led in that many of the widgets that were listed above accept a single child inside the widget itself, and these lists will accept multiple children. Rows and columns and stack, which I've just briefly touched on, are some of the ones that are very commonly used. And honestly, if you have know your way around a row, a column, a stack, and a container, chances are you could probably make most any layout that you want in a Flutter app and see as you make it in real time. There is a very cool open source app that you can use that will allow you to mess around with some of the various settings that you can do for a row and a column, for a stack, and for an expanded, as well as for padding. So it actually gives you a little bit more depth as compared to what I was talking about earlier. And if there was one single video that I would recommend, it is the Fireship Flutter layouts for the CSS developer, where they also talk about rows, columns, stack, and margins in a little bit more detail, as well as they show you how to make a very basic app. So let's go ahead and work with rows and columns. If you are ever confused, as I mentioned, you can always take a look at the Dart language core. Lists being the most useful part, and if you actually click over here, it will explain what a list or array is, and it's really just defined by being in square brackets, and you can also say what type it is. If you looked at columns, and the same is true for rows, it's instead of a child, takes children, and they are of type widget, and there's the square bracket, and then it gives each widget just below. So I actually want this container to accept, instead of a text, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to give it a column. And within that column, I'm going to allow those children of type widget, and I'm just going to hit save. And this should look almost exactly the same, except that the column is going to fill all that available space going down, down, down. If I hit comma, and let me just reformat so you can actually see, and hit save, now you're going to have 2 and 3, and I could really just keep going in that direction. If I decided that I wanted it to go instead of horizontal, instead of vertical, I want it to go horizontal, I can do that, but it's not really the best way to do this because it's not going to be able to scroll, and it's going to give me this little minor error message that you have essentially overflowed. So let's keep this in columns for now. Here we go. And let's actually get rid of those extra margins just because we don't really need them much anymore. And while we're at this, let's change all of these letters to A, M, I, and A-M-I-A. And now it may be a little less wieldy when we actually have this across. One other thing that you can do within a row or a column is you can take some of these fields for main axis alignment and main axis size. As an example, for main axis alignment, if you want them to all space evenly, it will look like that. If you want them to all be at the end, it'll put it there, versus space around and space between. And if you're ever curious as to what it'll do, usually if you hover your mouse over, it will also give you the example. Or these API talks tend to be extremely helpful for telling you actually what the difference is between for each of these. So I want them to be spaced around because I think that looks a little bit cooler. And eventually I'm going to change this color. Well, we can just go ahead and do that now. Change this color to blue. There's a little bit too much blue clashing right now. So I'm going to uncomment this theme and make this one orange. Okay. Okay, so now that we have all of these building blocks for widgets, that take one child and then also take multiple children, I think we are now ready to actually start making this app. And I'm also going to bring over the screenshot of the app. I'm going to take this widget catalog, which is from api.flutter.dev. I'm just going to make it really small. And we're going to make use of some of the parts within here. And if we ever need to search for something, so for example, AppBar class, we'll be able to look that up and it'll tell us examples of the stuff that we actually want to put within. And we're just going to move this way down to the side. So if you look at the AppBar itself and what we also have, we need this top part to actually say home. So we'll just say home. Let's rename the whole title of the app to Flutter4CME. Hit save, you'll see that. And over here you have two icons. And if you looked over at the AppBar itself, it accepted title, but this part right here are called actions. And so if we go to this part, which is within the scaffold AppBar, I start typing this in, it's going to take an array of widgets, and the widgets themselves are going to be icon buttons. And this is another thing that, you know, if you want to, you can actually look this up, or you can start looking down where it says action, widget, icon button. And the icon button is going to take an icon itself, and then a tooltip, and then something called on pressed. And I'm not going to explain what this does, but I'm actually going to make this whole thing be blank just because it doesn't need to have any sort of action at this point. So this is essentially what I'm following from as I work my way down. So icon is going to be, if you look, this looks like a search bar. So it's going to take icon, and that's the widget, dot search, icons dot search. And if you hover over, sometimes it'll actually also give you what that looks like. If you look, this is giving me an error message, and if I have it say what the actual concern is, it's giving me that it needs an on pressed function. And what else does it need? I think that should be it. It hasn't given me one yet. There it goes. Okay. All right. So I have one icon button. Now I'm going to want to make two. So I'm just going to copy that, hit save, and it should have two search icons. But I don't want this to be a search. What I actually want this to be is a little more icon right there. So this first part is now done, and I'm keeping it orange. And actually, while we're at this, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Let's just make it say Flutter4CME again. All right, so that top part is now done. Looking at this bottom series right here, this is actually called a bottom navbar, and I will show you where this comes from here. And if you want to see this with a little bit more detail, and actually, you know, I can just show you how I even got to this in the first place from flutter.dev, from the docs, from the widgets catalog. Very basics. And this all, you can find hot links for this under the scaffold itself. And it will actually tell you, let me just make this full screen so you can see it. This is the AppBar. There is something called a bottom navigation bar. As you look through, it tells you what each of these parts are, and then you can just open it into a new tab. So this usually has multiple items. we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items, and actually because if there's more than 4, I actually want this to be of type fixed. So what we'll do is, this is all within the scaffold. There's the app bar, there's the body, and here's that end part where it says scaffold ends. So I'm just going to go here and type in bottom navigation bar, and it's going to take something of class bottom navigation bar. And here I mentioned type, oops, type is of bottom nav bar type dot fixed. Let's reformat this so you can actually see it. Next thing that we're going to have to accept is items, and the items themselves will just open an array, and that will take bottom navigation bar items, and it's going to take multiple. So let's at least just have 2 of these, and as you are looking down, here is what I'm looking at this point. So it's going to have to take an icon and a title. So each one of these, I'm just going to take, just for the time being, I'm going to take this icon, and then we'll give it a title as well. Title, and let's just call this, it's going to need to take a text widget, and we'll just say text. Let's see if that breaks our app. Oh, it did. Failed assertion, items length greater than 2 is not true. So if you need to make this right here, this is one of the really nice things in Flutter. If it breaks, it doesn't completely crash the app entirely, it just tells you what the error message is. And if we had state saved, it would keep that state, which is really, really, really useful. So now we have 2 parts, and here you actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to make a couple more. 1, 2, and 3. So that should be 5 total. Correct. And you know, it's at this point it's getting a little bit unwieldy, but I will show you how you're able to get some of these out here very soon, so that you can actually read more and more and make this whole part more legible. And so now what we have is a home, and it has to say home. So let's set the first one to home, and let's set this to a home. The next part is going to be my event, so we need to set this part to my event, and that little icon of a person actually looks like a person. Let's see if it changed them. There's 1, there's 2. Here's our agenda, and it's going to be agenda, and that icon itself looks pretty close to a calendar. It's actually called event. Hit save, there it is. Next is attendees, and that just looks like people. And attendees, and let's just see what people looks like. That's pretty close. Actually, if we wanted it to be outlined, let's see what that does. I think that's a little bit closer. And then the last one is going to be more, and though that actually is a menu icon. Okay, so we've made this top part, we've made this bottom part. Now we're going to take a little bit of a break, and I'm going to explain to you why it's important to try and get these out of a single tree, because it's starting to get a bit unwieldy.